Well, welcome to the Church Office Podcast. My name's Gavin Smith, and it's a joy to welcome you today to this podcast and to the video. And I'm really thrilled to have Robin with us today. Robin Vincent from the CEO at Care for the Family.
Thank you, Gavin.
Mate, thanks for coming on the podcast.
No problem.
Not only is he coming on a podcast, he's kindly given us time in the studio. We've got flashy cameras. Mate, this place looks great. This will be the best video podcast I think I've ever done.
So, it will make up maybe for the lack of content. Yeah.
No.
People can watch it and enjoy it.
So thank you to everyone here at Care for the Family and making this happen.
No
and
problem.
It's a thrill to kind of link up together. And I really wanted to interview you, Robin, because you've got so much experience of leading people, managing people. I know you work for Care for the Family. You've got 85 people who work for you here. And so it's great to be able to come to someone like yourself and say, right, help us church administrators to lead our teams better, to think about how we can sort of grow in this whole area. So that's the kind of topic for today's podcast, and we're thrilled to do that. Before we get into it, tell us a little bit about your involvement here and your history, because you've got a background which just is all about people, all about teams, leadership. And so, tell us a bit about your story.
Okay, so I began my working life. I was considering a career in the armed forces, but in the end I chose the police. So I finished a degree and chose the police. So I then worked in the police for a while. Had two stints in the police with fraud investigation for insurance companies. In the middle of that, working in the insurance industry. And then I eventually left all of that behind. I'd been always involved in church planting, starting new churches around the UK, my wife and I. And I therefore went to work full time for one of the churches that I'd started and been involved in starting, and then eventually moved to Wales with the intention of starting another church, and found myself therefore in Care for the Family. And then about 5 years into working for Care for the Family, I joined the leadership team of Care for the Family, became a director, and then about 2 months before COVID hit, I took over as chief exec from Rob Parsons to lead Care for the Family, and stepped away from the church stuff. So I think that's what you're asking.
I think it's great.
A quick summary of my background.
Police, fraud investigator, you've been a pastor, church planter. I mean, the fact that you've been involved in church so much is great, because you're going to understand the context and be able to help us apply this whole topic well. And then just, everything that you do day to day here is great. So tell us a bit about Care for the Family and what you guys do. Okay,
so Care for the Family is nearly 35 years old.
Brilliant.
And it was really set out to stand and support families, both in the good times and the times of difficulty, both being important. I think one of the intentions was, instead of just being, as it were, it's often been said, like an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, could we help build a fence at the top of the cliff for families, maybe bring stuff that would be helpful to them, content, teaching, resources that would be helpful to them to apply into their own family life, that might prevent things happening, that might enable better outcomes for their family or families in the community. So Care for the Family's always had that as its intention, to be preventative. But at the same time, a real recognition that actually life doesn't always go the way we'd hoped, expected, that many people, in fact all of us at some point or another, will go through a time of difficulty. Sometimes those periods will last far longer. And so Care for the Family really wanted to make sure as well that we set up support and provided resources and stood with people when they're going through those difficult times. And so Care for the Family does, as well as therefore providing resources and content that encourages and strengthens families around marriage, parenting, relationships, bereavement, but also just to stand with people when they're going through the hardest times as well. No,
that's excellent. And you'll probably, if you're listening to this on the podcast, you probably would have come across projects like, Who Let the Dads Out, which, we've been involved in at our church. The Kitchen Table Project, these are current projects that are being used a lot. The bereavement support that you talked about, we've had a friend who's come along and used your service, and it's changed their life. And it's been so helpful. So loads and loads of resources. So as listeners, please go out and check out Care for the Family website. Look at what they've got available. Look at how churches can link in. I mean, many churches have linked in. What's the strength of linking in with you? in terms of churches? What's those options?
I think the way churches can link in is if there's anything we can do to help a church, we will do that. And the best way is to begin a relationship with us by contacting us, saying what their problem is, what their need is, what they're looking for, and then we will try and engage with them to supply them with what they need. We can train people in the community, churches in the community, to do incredible work really with those that aren't in the church as well, families that aren't in the church. I mean, one thing I think to really stress to anybody listening who's not familiar with Care for the Family, if you go on our website and you find any resource that you cannot afford, if you contact us, we will send it to you free of charge. We have literally over 35 years probably given away hundreds and hundreds of pounds of resources that way. In other words, what we want to do is put these resources, put that support into the hands of people who either it will help them directly, or they can use it or be trained to use it in a way that help people in their community.
Great. Well, listeners, there's an open invitation there, so please get in contact with Care for the Family. Well, let's get on to our topic today then. So leading people, managing people, you've probably done that across all the different backgrounds and jobs that you've got. Have you got any sort of key things that you will go to, key practices that you think about when dealing with people that you just think would be helpful for a reminder for our guys?
Well, I suppose, I mean, we were chatting about this briefly before we started recording, and one of the things I said is, in many ways, it's not particularly complicated dealing with people. First of all, remember the principle: treat people as you would want to be treated. Speak to people as you'd want to be spoken to. That doesn't mean always that you want to be. It all has to be softly or nicely. Sometimes challenge is required. So I think that's important. I think many years ago, something that immediately comes to mind for me was something that was taught to me by a very experienced pastor from some years back, was when you encounter someone who has stumbled or fallen or made a massive mistake in some way, either think to, first of all, maybe, well, what if that was me? But sometimes, depending on some people, not everybody listening will have children, but maybe they've got a brother or a younger brother or a nephew or a niece or somebody like that, somebody they can relate this to. Imagine it was them. Imagine it was them. How would you want them to feel when they've walked away from that conversation with you, from that discussion with you? And I think that's important. And I applied that principle even in the police when I was dealing with people. I mean, inevitably, I dealt with people who weren't to be reasoned with in that sense. But most people in the end, even when they were difficult at the beginning, by the time they leave your company, which may be several hours later, and it may be after they've sobered up, most people, if you are reasonable with them and treat them with a degree of dignity and respect, then they will do the same. In fact, a phrase in the police that is used time and time again was, behaviour breeds behaviour. And that's so true. And I think that's true in every context,
looking after your staff,
people,
building relationship with them, caring for them. It's not just about getting a job done, is it, necessarily? But Christ's example, isn't it, is perfect for us. He had compassion on people, he loved people, he challenged people, didn't he? And he told truth to people. And so all of those things, we want to be Christ-like in the way that we relate to our staff.
Also, so just to say as well, Gavin, is just to jump in on that as well, I think it's really important as well when we're dealing with people, and particularly when we've got a level of responsibility for people, that we are willing to admit our mistakes. And also with the people that work closest to us, I think we should, if we can, and I do this with several people who work very closely with me, not people that are my peers in terms of authority, but people who report to me. I've often said to them, tell me my blind spots. If you're the people who work closest with me and report to me and you don't tell me my blind spots, what chance have I got? Now, it's taken a long time for me to get to the place where they do it, but it is a gift to me when I get feedback from people that I lead and they tell me what they really think about what I did and how I did it.
It's so helpful. I mean, it enters into the conversation of of culture here, haven't we, what we're talking about? So if you lead yourself well, you can lead others. If you, an example of good behavior and you treat people well, then, others will treat others well, and it spreads, doesn't it, this idea. So you've got 85 staff in Care for the Family. How do you create the right structures and things in place for team development, for individuals to be developed in the team? How do you start to kind of put some of that stuff into practice?
I think one wants to always create an environment where people are allowed to take initiative,
okay,
and people are able to make mistakes. You need the conversations that can be had then when the mistakes are made, as to why was that a mistake, and you need to have the teachability in the people who have made the mistake to go, oh, I can see that now. But if you create a culture of fear, then people are so afraid of a decision, and so afraid of making a mistake that they don't do anything. They always, and I said, if you're going to give people accountability for their work, you need to give them responsibility for it. If you're not careful, if you give people the responsibility but you make all the decisions for them, then effectively they're not responsible. They're not responsible. So I think that combination of accountability and responsibility goes together. So I mean, there will be development things going on in Care for the Family. I'm not sure I'm as clued up as to what all of those things are, except to say, I think for me in leading, my desire for the culture here is that people would be hungry to grow, hungry for more responsibility, hungry to develop. And therefore, I am of the view that I would want people to have the initiative to come forward and say, I think this would really help me. I think this training would be really good for me. Can I do it? These are the boundaries we might lay down to make that possible. But I think I would always encourage that. I think huge amounts of it needs to be driven by the people concerned to want to get better, want to know more, want to learn more. And I think that would be the culture we would want here.
I love that. That's really helpful. In terms of other cultural things, have you developed a leadership team? Was that something that when you first started you wanted to strengthen in Care for the Family and just bring a little bit more clarity? Because people talk about organisational clarity and teams and having those structures in place so that everyone can kind of find the place where they fit in an organisation. Have you've broken down into different departments, have you, and got different people involved?
Yes, I certainly, as you're asking these questions or talking about these things, I mean, I have been in organisational leadership in one form or another, both obviously in the police. I been part of a social action project in Swansea, leading the church, and now here in Care for the Family. I'm very mindful. I've been doing this for over 2 decades at least. I don't want to get to the third decade at this moment. I still feel relatively young. And you suddenly become aware, very much so, that not everything that one has ever done has left a sweet taste in everybody's mouth. So number one, right? So I don't suppose anybody that would have that is listening, but you are aware that not every decision you make is popular, and not every organisational shaping that you do is everybody's giving you a high five as you leave the building that day. I think organisations now have to change more often than they did.
And that's a good point, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the challenge is, as an organisation grows and changes, the degree of competence and the character should always be the same in leadership, but the need for growing competence will always be present, won't it, in an organisation that's growing. As a Care for the Family, we've got effectively 3 departments presently. We have heads of department, and then above that, so to speak, in terms of a reporting structure, we have a senior leadership team. But that leadership team is also in a period of sort of transition, and what I mean by that is that we talk about that quite openly. I am well, I'm not now, I was when I came on the team the youngest person in that team. And we are just trying to now lay some foundations for the future of Care for the Family and make sure that we've got a leadership team that can take us into the future. And my colleagues know that. We're not putting a timeline on that. We just know that we need to think about the future as much as we consider the present and lead in the present. And then each head of department will have a variety of teams placed in it. We try and give a level of continuity to the departments so that it kind of works. They work somewhat independently. The truth is, I think it's very difficult to get it to the point where everything can just work independently to one head of a department or one decision maker. It just doesn't work like that. I think it has to be a collaboration. And Care for the Family is quite a creative organisation, and therefore I think it's more collaborative. But not only that, and just to add really, I suppose, that in a world where digital and technology are also prevalent, and also we've got a lot of data, you have to work alongside those department. You have to think about all that stuff as well. So it's a bit like a church leader can get up and, I don't know, preach on a Sunday, but there's a heck of a lot of organisation that goes on behind the scenes just to make the people even in the room comfortable. No. It's a team effort always.
It is a team effort. Yeah, absolutely right. And I guess there's a step before, forming teams and creating teams is this kind of, what's our organisational purpose, and what are some of the essentials, and we're talking about change here, and the organisation constantly changing. And one of the exercises I recommend for listeners to do is, and we do it with churches, is to kind of think about what do we need to continue, like what's essential that we do coming back from COVID, what do we need to stop actually, and what do we need to start, and put things into those three categories. And you find actually that there are things that we don't need to do anymore because things have changed. And within that, then you've got people that move, don't you, into different roles, and there is constant change into actually, right, what do we need to do now going forward for the future? And so some of these exercises are useful. And I guess people that do them with the teams and work through these kind of questions, they see the most amount of fruit, don't they, I guess, as you take, your team on a journey coming back. Have you done stuff where you've pulled all the team together to think about your purpose and how you position people, best places and things like that?
Yes, to a degree, yes. So here's what I think happens, and I think this is what happens in Care for the Family. I think 3 times a year as a senior leadership, we will go away and we will spend a couple of days together. Now, I realise depending on your circumstances, depending on how easy that will be for you to do. But the principle being, we at least have one day where we're neither coming nor going, where we can just get time together. We try and pace that really well, so we slow down. I think that's a really important thing. And then we try and identify the topics that we need to take a bit more time to chew over. Often we will make a decision when we talk about it that day, but we'll sleep on the decision and we'll just revisit it the day after. So there's that level of conversation, which will be a very high level strategic conversation. I think though, when you then trying to come back and think, well, okay, how do we implement that? There are still many questions you don't have the answers to, and there are many obstacles en route that you can't even see because you're not necessarily in the detail of it. You then need a conversation with the next group of people that you need to start to talk about this with. So that there's a lovely book by John Kotter, Kotter, and it's called Leading Change, and I've never forgotten it. I'm not very good at remembering all the books I've read, but this guy wrote a book called Leading Change, and he talks about the kind of 8 principles that bring about change. And this could be change as in developing the direction of travel or the common purpose or whatever it is. And one of the things he says in that, which is a funny little one of the 8, but it's funny how I can remember it still because it's an odd phrase. He says you need to build a sufficiently powerful guiding coalition. In other words, all the principles I think are in the book of Nehemiah. Effectively says we need to get a group of people here that are on board with this in order to implement it. And I think therefore to take people with you, not only to take them where you want to go, but also to ensure that you get to where you really need to get to, you do need to do it sort of step by step. And I suppose a mistake that I've made over the years, and I probably still make it, even if I'm aware of it, is you have talked about something for a long time, that when you introduce it to the person who is hearing it for the first time, you don't allow enough time for them to get on board with it and to even have their questions or their observations or their feedback or their course corrections. You just don't.
That's
useful. You've done it for so long.
You've lived in it.
You lived in it for so long. You just can't, you know. And I like to get stuff done. So I'm desperate just to get stuff done. And I think one has to pause for a minute. And I guess that would be very applicable for administration. You've planned the way to do this.
And now you're communicating to volunteers.
You know, and they're just going to get around their head. And somewhere, you know, there will be, sometimes you want the character of the people who are being led. We're all being led by someone. To be sometimes I'll just lean in and serve. I mean, I'm not leading in the church I'm in now, and my job is to be led really well. But my job also is to serve and follow really well. But sometimes people can ask a really good question. You go, I've not thought of that. And you've got to be able to hear it. But if you're not careful, you miss it, don't you?
No, I think that's really good, and the stuff that you're talking about with your team there, it's useful, and you know, there's so many good kind of management books and management people that say you want to build a cohesive leadership team first, and as you build that, you know, you work through the organization to, you know, everyone understands the purpose, where they fit and what they're contributing to what you're trying to achieve.
So Gavin, can I just say something on that then? One observation I would make then, as I said at the beginning, dealing with people is quite simple in the principles. And so if I just take it to an extreme, even dealing with people in the police, occasionally when you turn up in the police, you haven't got time to talk to people. But actually sometimes it is necessary to take time with people, listen to them, talk to them, and they are far more cooperative and easier to work with. So then you apply it into an organisation. I was actually just talking to a member of staff today. I saw an opportunity. It's going to make me sound like a better leader and manager than I am, but I saw an opportunity. I know this person wants to get better at what they do, and they want to get better at leading people. And I knew that the day before they'd done something. They rarely get stuff done. They love getting stuff done. They're very, very good at it. But they kind of missed the moment. They just went to let's get the job done. And they spoke to another member of staff. And the other member of staff, great character, wants to help, but was just felt a bit like they wasn't treated very well. And so I just wanted to talk to this individual about it. And the real missing factor was time. The willingness to slow down. And I would imagine Jesus, being the ultimate people person and the best leader there could be, was pretty good at slowing down.
You're absolutely right.
I mean, he did the difficult conversation on the road, I think, with the disciples, didn't he? He said, what were you guys talking about on the road? You know, you can imagine that he just took his time with people, and you need that, don't you? When you're taking people with you, you need to give them time.
Absolutely right. And I think it's one thing here to recognize that, in a church context, when you work for a church, all your worlds come together, don't you? You're working there, you're a member of this church, all your friendships are in there, your families are. And so when everything's great, it's fine. But when there are challenges or there are things that you need to work through, it does become that bit harder. And you're right, we can be driven by our task list as administrators and miss the people and the time that's needed. And I think that's a really helpful piece of wisdom. Thank you for that. That's great. Communication then is key, isn't it, in leading teams? I mean, everyone wants to be a better communicator, and there's courses and there's all these things. How have you sought to do that? So taking time with people is part of leading into this conversation, but communicating to your teams, how often are you touching base? Annual reviews, what kind of things do you have in place structure-wise that will help you in this area?
So I would almost certainly imagine every team has a team meeting every week. I'm almost certain of that. And one of the reasons I would say I know that without me, like I said, I mean, these, there are guys who've got responsibility to lead their team. So I would expect that to be happening. For me, one of the things I asked to do is I asked to be invited into those team meetings. So I shall, by the end of this year, have sat in every single one of the team's meeting. Every team meeting I can get into, I will at least be there. And my role of being there is to say, look, I'm here. You might want to ask me a question. you don't want to ask in any other context. So that's number one. I think that's really key, because you're getting relationally with people in that way. And you're not trying to take over their team meeting. You're just there to say, I'm here, I'm interested. I'm interested in your world.
What you guys are doing.
And what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
We do have we have an intranet, which is like a internal, website, as it were, Care for the Family. And we recently introduced this year questions for, I think it's called Questions for Robin. It's not very creative, but that's what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
And we've said to people, you can put a question on there and ask any question. I will receive that question. It will come to me directly. And you can ask it anonymously, or you can put your name. If you put your name, I promise you, whether I can't answer it or whether it's not the answer you want to hear, I will come back to you.
Yes.
So when I get those questions, I'm really keen to acknowledge the person and just say, just so you know, I've got your question. And I am organised enough to make sure that I don't ever not go back to someone. It might take me 2 months, but I've bought myself 2 months by even saying to them, I've got your questions. We have that level of communication going on. And I think that's a really good thing. Somebody who I led with in a church some time ago said once, why would you not want to know what people are thinking? They're thinking it. You might as well know it. So I'm a massive fan of communication in saying, if you're thinking it, tell me it. If you're not happy, tell me. You might as well tell me.
Yes.
You know, I can only respect you for telling me. And then I think as well with communicating with people, and I did this when I was leading a small team here, but I think it applies whether you're leading a small team, whether you're whatever responsibility you've got for communicating to stuff to other people. I think where you can, you should take the opportunity to communicate, even if you don't have the whole answer or all the information. So I took the opportunity even this week just to acknowledge the staff that we're really aware of some of the challenges currently for people living in the UK. And I don't have all the answers for yet, but I wanted to assure them that there was hard work being done. And I want to assure them that we're aware of it. Now, somebody will say to me, that's really unwise, because you know, you're in danger of people getting hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. I say, yeah, possibly. But the truth is, I want them to know that I'm thinking about it, because I know that if I was them, I'd want to know that I was thinking about it. And I think people would rather have a leader that tells them stuff than nothing at all. None of us know what we don't know. And so I think that sort of level of communication is really, really key.
Being involved in that process, isn't it, of decision making, you know, that as elders we're thinking about this, so as deacons we can, when we're ready to respond, or administrators when we're, you know, going to put something into action, then being involved in that process as you go along does make you feel part of it, and does help you, I think, with the delivery of it. Definitely
it does. And I think when it went into COVID, we had to make some very rapid decisions. And we had to make, you know, some adjustments and changes and adapt and everything else. And I said at the time, or I think I said at the time, guys, we will do all we can to tell you our decision, but we will also tell you why, the rationale behind the decision. It may not be that you'll agree with it, but you'll understand the logic that was applied to get to where we got to. And I'm not naive enough to think that when I've had to make a really tough decision, that the person who ends up being the person that doesn't benefit from that tough decision, whether it's it's like criticism, or whether it's, you know, I don't know, the end of a fixed term contract or something. I'm not kidding myself that they're there going, oh, Robin's such a lovely bloke. I get that. But I try in my mind to at least have the intention, as best as I'm able, that they walk away and go, I may not agree with this decision. I may not even think it's a logical decision or a fair decision, but I cannot question the clarity and the frankness and the honesty that I have been given as to why they did make the decision, whether they agree with me or not. I think people deserve that. They deserve that. And when you do that consistently as a leader, and I think this has probably been put into me even with the small exposure to the armed forces that I had, to use that phrase, that then people will follow you a lot further into far more uncomfortable territory, because at least they know where they stand.
No, that's really helpful. And I think I remember one leader saying to me about his principle was over communicate. So, even if you think you've communicated it once, actually reinforce it, go and have a conversation. And he said to me, have you ever considered how your staff would like to be communicated? Have you ever thought about their preference? So for some of my staff that I'm involved with the church, they want to sit down and have a coffee and chat about it. For others, it's like, send me an email. And so there's different communication preferences. And then even as we roll that on to kind of managing volunteers, it's actually wise to take the time to think, right, how does this person, is change coming? This person really struggles with change. Right, I need to give that a little bit of extra time. And for other people, it's like, oh yeah, right, we're doing that. Fine, okay. Tell me what I can do. And everyone's different, aren't they? And so
it's really good, Gavin. That's my takeaway. My background is the police, the army. I've done church leadership, so I've got a little bit. I'm somewhere trying to get closer to Christ. That environment though didn't set me up for let's ever do a lot of. I learned to do on the street softly as much as you're able, because it's a lot easier and you don't get blood on your shirt. That's the truth here, or dirty trousers, right? But in terms of the actual environment, it's not really environment. It's a structured environment with orders you follow. So I think that's a really wise bit of advice you've just given, really, because I think then when you come out of that context into another culture, which you care for the family, you do have to consider all those things. I don't know how good I am always at doing that. I can be, I've done led churches. I can be very but to try and transfer it over into an organisational role sometimes is probably a little bit harder for me sometimes. I was saying to someone earlier today, one of the things I'm very aware of is when you lead an organisation is you can't just walk to the photocopier with a grumpy face anymore. When you just worked in your thing, you could be all right. And now you've got to do this all singing, all dancing, wonderful, chirpy leader, friendly fellow. And that's totally good. I am on board with that. I do smile to myself going, oh, that's hard work at times. Sometimes you just want to hide. Just get on with your job.
I love that. Let me ask you a couple of specific questions. So kind of caring for staff and wanting to stretch staff, those kind of, I find that internal conflict sometimes. You think, I'm not sure how they're doing, but I need to, or there are seasons where actually I need to put a little bit more demand on them, and I know that's going to be a struggle. So this kind of, helping in those two aspects of, care in a season, but stretching and pushing people to be better. Any thoughts around that? Because that's, administrators are going to be managing one or two people, and we're very familiar with different people, and, probably a lot of people have been involved in posts for a number of years. And so you're in a pattern. But actually, how do you get more and more out of people and make more people successful as well, I guess, in that?
Yeah. Well, my responsibility, I think, at Care for the Family, number one is remember there are people. Remember they've got families. They've got people they love. So that was one of the things we emphasised in COVID, that I've got two responsibilities. One, to make the organisation effective, to be a good steward of the funds and the resources that the supporters have given us. So that's really good. But of course, at the same time, is to care for the staff and make sure that they feel loved and cared for. And this is a lovely place and a great place to work and a mission worth giving your time and energy to. I think, therefore, in leading an organisation, you need to know that both are happening and people have got focus on both. So I've got people who will probably give more time and energy to thinking about how do we care for staff and look after staff. And I've got other people who I know will give more time and energy to how to make sure it runs effectively. And I think you need both. Many years ago, I had to do some work around preparing a kind of risk management thing to do with what if we lost someone in a key member of staff in whatever form, we just lost them and they became unavailable. Well, how would we handle it? And I realized when I prepared that you need both elements.
Yeah.
Because then the people who are charged with the responsibility of keeping the organization running can do so knowing that someone else is thinking about the care of the people that are affected by this.
Yeah.
And so for me, I've always remembered doing that exercise, never had to really employ it to the degree that I had to do the work for it. But I remember learning something about that. You need both going on. I think the challenge is at the higher level of leading is to try and keep both in your mind and your heart as you go.
Yeah.
And somehow you need to do that. But it's a tension to manage.
Yeah.
You're never going to get rid of that tension.
No, I agree. Yeah.
You know, but you do want to know at the end for me, I tell myself this, when I as best as I'm able, there's two things I make sure on this. Best as I'm able, when I meet Jesus, he might say, well done, good and faithful servant, come and share in the master's joy. So I've cared for people and I've led well and handled the talents I've been given. Yeah. You know, I think that's a really, really key thing. Yeah. And, you know, Rob Parsons has taught me over the years, when you're communicating, never say two things, because now, for love nor money, I cannot remember the second thing. It will come back to me later tonight when I reflect on this podcast.
So let me ask you another practical question then. So staff reviews. I mean, I've met some churches that don't have staff reviews, and, you know, we tend to use them sometimes. I know other organisations are absolutely rigid. They'll do monthly supervision and you know, annual reviews or appraisals. What's your take on that? Because it's quite mixed, and I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are.
I think staff reviews have got a benefit insofar as I think people want to know you care. Yeah. I think when people don't have any structure to feeling like they are going to get time with their manager, their supervisor or whatever, I think they feel like they've lost out. The truth is, though, most staff reviews, the conversations that are needed, if they're difficult ones, should have been, in fact, even if they're good ones, should have been happening all throughout the year. I have written quite a few cards to staff. I think it has surprised me when I walk around this office sometimes and I see my card on the desk of the people I've written to. Now, it's not because I think, well, a bit of me goes, gosh, it reminds me how powerful my words can be as an individual. I'm more reminded of how important it is to thank people for what they do. Everybody wants to be thanked. Everybody wants to be encouraged. Yes. And I think staff reviews serve that purpose. Yeah. I am never quite sure where I land with goals. I think they can be useful. My biggest problem with goal setting, in my mind, is you and I've been there, sitting there with people that set goals for me, or I've come up with goals that I've got to do, you know, or whatever. Is I often think to myself, well, okay, well, I get to the end of the year and the goals are achieved. What was? I didn't really see how that benefited the staff review personally. I think there's a real value in sitting down and saying, this time is for allow you to speak really honestly and know that we've got a structure here that says you can talk to us and tell us what you think and how you feel about your role and your work at Care for the Family and even Care for the Family. And I think it allows that. So my feeling would be staff reviews encourage conversation. Ideally, you want staff reviews where you go, well, we feel almost a bit like we're already doing this. But again, I still don't think we should rob people of a staff review, even if we think we're doing the best conversations ever. You know?
And I think it's good. It gives you kind of, I guess, a set point or a milestone to say, right, here's some encouragement. Let me hear how honestly how I'm doing as a leader, which we've already talked about, that disposition, but also, how do we move forward? How do we better you? And I think they can be useful, but you're right. If you can build a culture where those conversations are happening, where there's regular encouragement, where there's regular challenge to say, I think you could do this better. How do we bring excellence to this? You know, how do we reflect God more in the quality of something that we're delivering or something that we're serving in? You do want those points. So if you're a busy organization, I guess having staff reviews in a fixed point will serve you, you know, because you are. But I guess for lots of church administrators, you know, sitting down with staff, having conversation, giving time, all of these things can still be achieved, along those kind of lines, rather than a set structure.
So an observation I make, and I don't know how you would apply this, a church administrator, but an observation I would make as a church leader of old and being around church leadership for a while, I don't think the fundamentally the employee of the church leader is often the trustees.
Yeah. And
actually, I think it's interesting from trustees. I don't think they need to do performance reviews, but I think there's a real opportunity there for them to meet with people that they're employing and just encourage them and just say, are you okay? Are you pacing the race?
Yes.
Are you doing all right? Yeah. How do you feel? And I think we miss those moments where we could do that as a regular thing. Yeah. And if the problem with staff reviews is you've got to do it consistently. Yeah. If you do it once and then you miss the next 3 years, which is the risk in churches and volunteers, when you're dealing with volunteers, is you miss those things and then people start to, you should never have started what you can't finish. Better not to. You just do more harm than good, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
You do more harm than good.
Give an opportunity to speak and then you're just taking it away for the next few years.
It's like earlier, if I couldn't remember the 2 things I should have said, I should never have said 2, because everybody's there going probably now still thinking, what's the second thing? Yeah. Trust me, I'm also trying to remember it, but I can't.
Now, you've opened up a small bit of conversation there about trustees stepping in and seeing how people are doing, and if you're a trustee or a treasurer or someone on maybe another role that's happening behind the scenes, which is crucial, check in on each other and see how each other are doing, because it kind of leads a conversation into burnout and how do you protect staff from burning out. And we talked a little bit before, didn't we, about capacity and Any thoughts about looking after staff in that way? Because churches have got visionary leaders, they've got loads of ideas, they've got no idea how to actually, what it costs to deliver something. We just started feeding people, sort of 450 people on Sunday, and you might think our elders might be thinking, oh yeah, that'll take a day to sort out or something, but they've got no idea of the how complicated it is, and all the food hygiene and all the thinking of how we're going to get people through this food, and all of those aspects and all the teams that we need to do it. So we've got these great visionaries, and then you're the person in your organization who's got to deliver it, and you might be the only person for some people listening. Burnout is a reality at some point, for some people. So finish on this. Any thoughts here that you've got? Any wisdom? Because I think you're going to have something here.
Okay, so first of all, leading people, you have to be secure, and I would say I got this from somewhere. Can't remember where I got it from, but you're not there to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be. You just have to be secure and be you. And the relevance of that is then when you ask somebody else to do something, you have to recognize you might not be the smartest person actually executing the plan. And you can be secure in that. You don't have to prove that you've got it. You know everything about everything, because you don't. It's just not possible, is it? Yeah. So then when you ask somebody to go and do something and they turn around and go, this is a bit harder than you think, I think there's a real responsibility to kind of go, okay, let me try and digest what I'm being told here. And I think that's really crucial. I think then that enables a conversation to go on about what are the boundaries by which we work and operate here. What is reasonable and what is not reasonable. Yes. And there's a couple of practical questions then, aren't there, about how scalable is what we're doing here, and how dependent is it on this one person. That's it. And when we're insecure, whatever stage we're at in that process, when we're insecure, we often try and hold on to things. Yeah, it's true. Or try and prove that we can do it all because we want to prove our worth, don't we? Yeah. We want to prove our worth.
I think that's going on.
And so you've got to be prepared to kind of go, you've got to battle with that and get to a place of security and go, this is okay to pace this and slow it down or limit it or put boundaries around it or ask for slowing down or whatever that may involve. The phrase, I listened to one of your previous podcasts and it was on capacity, and the guy was talking about motorways and using that analogy. Well, my background, as I've said, was the police, and advanced driving was part of my training early days. And one of the bits of advice I was giving you is you always drive the car at 80%. Even when you see these cars flying along the road, the really good drivers will be still driving at 80%. You'll be thinking, wow, that's fast.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is if you don't give 20% spare capacity in the car's power, then when you hit a hazard, you've got nothing left.
Got nothing to do. Respond.
So I think that's a good principle, not only for living, easy to say, harder to do, depending on your makeup. And some people actually can go a little bit bigger capacity, and their 80% is different to someone else's 80%. And that's a good bit of observation I'd make then on that is remember that don't put a burden on someone else for something that you've been given grace to do. So you've been given grace to do like 15 things really well. Well, don't expect everybody else to do 15 things really well. Don't put a burden on them when you've been given grace for it. I think that's a really key principle. So I think the key to any kind of project, probably to do it really well, I'm not sure again how well I've applied this always, is you're trying to probably say what is a 80% performance that allows us a bit of a buffer to react to illness, crisis, unexpected problems. The oven breaks if you're delivering food. You know, what do you do? How do you deal with that? You know, and also to allow for that moment when somebody turns up and they just want to talk and they want to cry, and you're so busy. This is an inconvenience now, isn't it? And that's not helpful really. So I think those would be my observations. I think on that. Yeah,
I think that's right. You know, thinking about staff's capacity, what we're asking them to do, regularly reviewing that, checking in on them, regular checkups, all these things make a difference, don't they, to getting the best out of people, setting them up for success, and working together. That there's that team, we're all in this together. And so let me take that from you today, so you've got a greater capacity. And I think on the capacity report, you know, if you're thinking about a church office, one of the things on that podcast was, you know, when someone's serving in reception, don't overload them with work, because the phone's constantly ringing and you're getting interrupted, and someone's, you know, text you and they're in crisis, and you have to respond to these things. So give people that grace to be able to kind of run at 80% capacity. And there are some times where actually, you know, you talk about Nehemiah, we're all going to have to do this wall today, and it's going to be full on, and it's going to be hours and hours of work. And so we're all going to be, you know, working as hard as we can. But then ensuring that people get their rest as well, which is another important aspect, I think, is how people take their holiday, making sure that they don't just, you know, waste it, or don't just you know, transfer it over to next year. But
and that's always a challenge. But the more you can do that, the better. I had, again, there were so many different people with so many different capacity levels and pressures. During COVID, we had several times we gathered some key staff who were, when I say everybody's a key member of staff, what I mean was they were doing key roles at that time that were linked to COVID, on COVID response. And we got them in a meeting, really just to say, we understand that you're operating at a level now which is unprecedented in terms of the demands on you, both at home and here, and we care. And you need to know we care. And we can't do all the stopping for you. We can't put all the boundaries in for you. And actually, we're in a difficult place because we need you to do some things. But at least have the conversation. And I think we did that relatively well. But again, organisationally, it's key. If you say that, and then you say, we're going to check in on you in 2 months' time, see how it's going. Well, make sure you've got that. You know, otherwise people just go, well, you know, after a while people cease to believe what you say, what you're going to do, you know, and say what you're going to do. Mean it.
That's really helpful. That care of people, that honesty, those honest relationships, building that culture, all the things that we've talked about will help teams thrive, will help you thrive, and you know, ultimately the gospel will go out, because you know, people in their churches are doing their best and are always pursuing excellence. So I love that. So if you're a church administrator, thank you so much for what you're doing and the difference that it makes behind the scenes. And you may not have anyone in your team that recognizes you, that's checking in on you, then don't do this on your own. You know, link into a church administrators network called You Can. You know, speak to the church office. There are people and places where you can go to get that kind of support and interaction. So Robin, thank you so much for your time, mate. We could sit
Pleasure.
here all day
Pleasure.
and talk, because you've got so much experience, and being able to apply it to the church, and also just to learn about what you're doing here at Care for the Family is brilliant. And keep going, because these resources are great, and we've seen them and have used them, and they're excellent. So
thank you, Gavin.
listeners, if you've got any questions on leading people, you want any follow-up, then please get in contact at questions at the church office. We would love to interact with you. And please check out the blog. Nigel Ring's done a blog for us on people first, and really what Robin's been sharing has been so much around that. Let's put people first. Let's care for people. Let's get the best out of people. So, mate, thank you.
No problem.
Great.
Pleasure.
We'll see you again next time on the podcast. Goodbye.